Hello and welcome to Happy Times and Places. Oh no. Hang on. This is a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, ask a friend to choose a Doctor Who story. I will commentate along, drop in some facts and observations, and pick my favourite moments too.
It's Mark Wright here. I'm a writer. I write lots of things about Doctor Who. The story that I have picked for you is The Ambassadors of Death.
It's Happy Times and Places. Well, last episode. Had to do it right, didn't I? I'm looking at a beautiful picture of the Third Doctor and Liz Shaw in Bessie, shot from above, which is the placeholder photograph for The Ambassadors of Death, Episode 7 on BBC iPlayer as part of the Whoniverse. 2 years ago, well, certainly 5 years ago, that entire sentence would have sounded like gobbledygook, but here we are. I have the episodes on DVD, but I can access them with more ease just by firing up the iPlayer and playing them and seeing the blurb which tells me that Carrington intends to turn the world against the aliens by revealing them on TV. Well, I'm going to reveal them on my TV and see how that turns out for us all on the end of what has been a very rewarding journey through the Ambassadors of Death. So before I press play, I'm just going to go through what some of the people who've been enjoying these episodes in my bespoke corner of the internet, my Patreon page, have been saying, because people have been really fired up and I'm enthused and really gratified by that, because Ambassadors is not a story that gets an awful lot of attention. So going back to episode 4, Steve White, as he was watching, I think, typed, "I've not got to Toby's favourite moment yet, but for me it has to be the lone astronaut slowly walking down the damp path towards space control." Well, Steve, you, Mark Wright, and me all chose that. So it's obviously a very popular moment, and I couldn't be more delighted. Michael Ferguson's use of the camera and lighting is cinematic, coupled with Dudley Simpson's simple repeated chords, make the moment so atmospheric. And once the sentry is disposed of, the Martian throws the barrier above his head and walks through, letting it fall down behind him without a second glance as it makes its way down the tunnel towards the heart of space control. Brilliant stuff. Mind you, says Steve, once you realise Tatalian's beard is glued on, you can't unsee it. Peter Crocker says, I think you'll find Liz Scammell, is hanging off a bridge over the weir, not off a weir. Yes. All right. Hashtag pedant mode, Peter adds, and rightly so, but he's also correct. Guy Lambert, absolutely bloody loving this. Fraser Gregory, so it was a Tatalian outfit you were wearing the other day, not a Travers one, rumbled. Oh, that's a reference to, a Instagram post where I was on a train dressed as me, and somebody thought I was hinting I was doing something for the Web of Fear because I was dressed as Professor Travers. Wasn't dressed as Professor Travers, I was dressed as me. Michael Herbert says, that's Marlow Weir. I went to school in Marlow in 1966-73 and used to row along the Thames there. In those pre-internet days, I knew nothing about the filming. Other locations used in Marlow included Gosmore Lane and Little Marlow Sewage Works. Geography is always my weak point, so thanks for that. Michael, how exciting to have had Doctor Who filmed near you as a boy. Adam Parkin says on episode 5, I haven't commented on it yet, as I'm younger than some here, and my first experience of The Ambassadors of Death was from buying the DVD. I love it, as I love all of Season 7 and Liz Shaw, but I feel this is the one story of the season that would have benefited from being an 8-parter, as it wraps up a little too suddenly for me. Well, we're about to see that, Adam. Either that, or have the more modern approach and end this story blending into the start of Inferno. I wouldn't like that. My stories to be clearly delineated. In fact, somebody was talking to me the other day about Utopia, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords, and it sends me quite in disarray. I was listening to Moths in my Doctor Who scarf earlier, says Julian Bashford. Yes, I was that Audible purchase this week. I had no idea there was an Audible purchase, Julian. I don't think I get royalties. Humorously, I should actually. Maybe I'll get a pence at the end of the year. Humorously, you go on about asking for evidence of wobbly sets. Go on, Julian, go on. I go on about. Do you mean I mention? And then I put on episode 5 and saw the wobbly safe that the ambassador breaks into. It almost falls through the false wall. Anyway, keep up the good work, and I'm diving into the podcast now. Yeah, well, I noticed a few wobbly walls in Regan's lair as well. So I'm obviously watching on a bigger telly than I watched when I was a boy. Joe Llewellyn, all the way from the States, says, loving this story and your commentary on it. This was the last story from Season 7 I watched, and I love it. Season 7 is its own thing and has a vibe unlike any other season. I agree, Joe. I like Season 7 a lot, and it is very much its own thing. Guy Lambert, I just saw this and I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to know that after a busy, enjoyable but busy week working, tonight I can listen to this lovely that's me, talk with unrestrained joy about this brilliant story. This is what I'm here for. Thanks, Guy. David Gillespie Pratt says, I'm halfway through and pushing a run to share a thought on the whole Benton-Carrington murder idea. What if it's an extra playing the body and Abernethy reading the line off camera? Oh, yes, I disagree with David here, but I like the fact he's been thinking about it. Glorious episode 5, says David in a new post that isn't full of ludicrous speculation. On that UK Gold copy I had back in the day, this was the episode that was barely watchable. Now, this is interesting about the different quality of the episodes. The picture quality was crushed and fuzzy, and the soundtrack hissed and popped to the point a good chunk of the dialogue was unintelligible. So when the official VHS came out, it was a shock to see this was one of the episodes that scrubbed up the best. But I have a massive soft spot for the rubbish quality version. I was delighted last year to find a copy of it online, and every now and then I like to share clips on Twitter as a reminder of how fortunate we are. It's funny, isn't it? Funny old thing. Frank Shell says, I want to know what Dallas Cavell's real name was now, and I made sure I furnished Frank with that. Norman Dallas Lefevre was Dallas Cavell's real name. Steve White, this was the episode that used to go out in UK Gold with the poor quality warning before it started, and at the ad break on the Sunday Omnibus he's put complication, but he means compilation. I'm still astounded at just how much the picture quality was enhanced for the DVD release. Lord knows what voodoo rituals must have been performed during the restoration to get so much of the picture back. And Benton back in action, John Levine cementing himself as a unit regular. Another great podcast and episode, says Andrew Llewellyn. My only irritation in an otherwise perfect instalment of those misspelled M3 variant signs. Grr. I know, bad spelling can ruin a story. Paul says, you mentioned Ferrero Rocher. Didn't John Abernethy feature on the advert as the waiter holding the tray of them? Isn't that why I mention them? I do hope so. Yes, Paul, that's exactly it. And in my show, Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, I had a whole thread about John Abernethy, and it was only the day before I opened that I was sort of tying it all up and sort of putting it all together in my head and practicing it, that I'd also got a mention of I can't remember anyway. It came to me at the last minute that I could do a joke about Ferrero Rocher and the Ambassadors of Death, because of course the Ferrero Rocher advert is the Ambassadors Reception. So I came up with a joke. You know, he's gone from the Ambassadors of Death to the Ambassadors Reception, which always got a great laugh. And I think because it was also sort of freshly minted, it was pretty much the last joke I wrote for the show, and I got all the pieces for it in place without realising that bit would add to it and just make it perfect. I hadn't brought John Abernethy into the show to make that gag. So yes, very much so, Paul. And Andy Parkinson says, like so many others have said, I'm so glad you're doing Ambassadors. It's my favourite Pertwee story. The whole Benton thing, I believe Benton delivered the food, but he was a patsy and didn't know he was delivering an isotope. And it was someone else who cuts the emergency alarm cable. It's amazing what we all can headcanon, isn't it? That's very true, Andy. That's plausible. Still not my headcanon, but I'm glad it's yours. And then for last installments episode 6. We have a few comments. We have David Gillespie Pratt again. If episode 6 of Ambassadors is considered by some fans as merely padding, I'll happily watch it any time. There's nothing wrong with stories being longer. Justice for the Pertwee 6-7 parters. Chris Williams says, I'm glad Caroline John is getting special mention here. The received wisdom generally is that the character didn't quite work or was too clever to be an effective companion. But in this story, Liz, even though she's locked up for most of it, is a brilliant and formidable character, capable of leading the plot as much as the Doctor or Brigadier. Look at how she squares up to Regan and how she persuades Lennox to take a path to redemption. Great writing and performance. Speaking of the brig, one scene has stuck in my mind from episode 1. When Recovery 7 gets a visual of the missing spacecraft, the Brigadier says, ask him if he's sure it's Mask Probe 7. Ask him! He again insists to a confused Cornish. It's something the Doctor might do. Given his previous experiences, his mind is fully open to the strange and unusual alien possibilities beyond what's in front of him. It's a long way from the, oh, come on now, Doctor, disbelief he'll occasionally be written as later. All 3 leads and characters are marvellous in this. It may not be the unit family, but they're just as bonded and maybe on a more equal footing. Perhaps in the style of one of those 60s ITV serials, such as The Avengers or Champions. Thanks for giving me a reason to watch this again. Oh, thanks, Chris. I really am loving all of this correspondence. And finally, Christopher Meredith. Apologise, as this will be long. I was going to jokingly berate you for not asking me to be on the podcast for this story, especially after all the contributions I haven't made to the Whoniverse. That's nonsense, Chris. You are a great correspondent, and I follow you on Twitter, and you always have interesting things to say. So now I might ask you to do a Happy Times and Places. Haha, so get choosing. And I was going to list my favourite things about the episodes like this. Episode 1, all of it. Episode 2, all of it. Episode 3, all of it. Episode 4, you get the idea. But I can't bring myself to berate you, says Chris. I first saw Ambassadors when I brought the VHS in W.H. Smith along with a DVD of the TV version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was 13 at the time, and although the Ambassadors VHS had a U certificate, the Hitchhiker's DVD had a 15 certificate. Still managed to buy both without having to show ID, though that may have been because my grandma was standing by me when I paid for them. I felt both dirty and delighted of that. Ha ha! Having been partially aware of its reputation, I put the VHS on with some trepidation. But when the titles of episode 1 faded into the action without showing the story title, and then eventually showing the title, The Ambassadors ker-pow of Death, I was instantly hooked. The cast, particularly the 3 regulars, and Abernethy, Dysart, Allen, Shaps, etc. The plot, the action, Michael Ferguson's fantastic direction, Dudley Simpson's score, all of it blew me away. While I love Spearheads, Silurians, and Inferno, Ambassadors is my favourite Pertwee story, and I would put it up there with The Caves of Androzani, Genesis of the Daleks, and City of Death. Just 2 things before I end this pointlessly long comment. Not pointlessly, not too long, Chris. If you're gonna marry Ronald Allen, I'll marry Joanna Ross, as I got a crush on her when I first saw this. Her and Caroline John. Oh, 2 ladies, Christopher. And unlike you, Toby, I wouldn't question where she was all the time. Finally, if you want to know how many beans make 5, to quote Baldrick from Blackadder, some beans. Well, thank you, Chris. I'm just adjusting myself so I don't get pins and needles, because I'm now going in for the kill, or the why do you make us kill, that is episode 7 of the Ambassadors of Death. As you can hear, all my correspondents have really enjoyed being part of this journey through this underloved story, and I can't tell you how chuffed that makes me. So I hope you'll enjoy joining me for episode 7 of the Ambassadors ker-pow of Death, which I'm going to start. It's my moral duty so to do. In 3, 2, 1. And I do think it's a great line, that as well, a great motivator. You know, I'm sorry, Doctor, it's my moral duty is a brilliant refrain for a villain. And the world is full of people doing what they think is their moral duty, and I think it's bold and clever of Doctor Who to decide to show, you know, a villain doing something from his own perspective. And as we will see, this is Carrington's episode, really. He isn't, in his eyes, a villain. Now, it interests me that I must have mentioned Ferrero Rocher in a previous episode, as Paul brought up there, and maybe gone off on a tangent. But John Abernethy is a very important figure to me in my journey through Doctor Who. And in fact, thanks to voters on my Patreon page, I didn't buy myself. I don't really get Christmas presents, and I didn't treat myself to anything this year. But I have got a little plaque for John Abernethy, commemorating John Abernethy at the Theatre 53.2, which I occasionally donate to in order to keep going. It's a lovely arts hub. It's also where I do my comedy club. But you can get a plaque if you make a donation over a certain amount. And I thought, well, I'll get plaques for my favourite actors. So Bernard Kay's got one, David Warner's got one, and John Abernethy now has one. I love the way that Regan, he needs the Doctor, but he's not gonna demean himself, even though Carrington is his kind of boss. John Abernethy, by the way, is perfect, but he doesn't uncock his gun there, so that could go off at any time. He should have done whatever it is you do to make the not the trigger, but that bit at the back go back in. But anyway, yes, I love the way that Regan, even though Carrington is his boss, doesn't go, "Oh, please, sir, don't do that." He goes, "Yeah, no, okay, kill him if you will." But he uses a bit of reverse psychology. He's as cunning as a fox and as sexy as a sexy fox. I do. Regan is brilliant. He's a beautifully written character. Both of these villains are great. Both of them are very different from your usual Doctor Who villain. And I don't think we've quite had... I love the way he sort of snaps himself out and goes, having said, Jim, he then goes, Jim Daniels, fellow astronaut, suddenly going into the sort of official, designation of who that person was. But it starts with a very human, they killed Jim. I love the way that he sort of flicks from one to the other. And yeah, we're getting all the reason why everybody's had their different motivations here. So Quinlan, he was just a glory hunter, and I love the way John Abernethy says they didn't know of my plan to save the world. There's something so sort of stupidly simple about that, and yet he's giving it all the gravitas that he can because he believes it. And that desperate need for him to be understood, I find terribly moving. This is a man who's seen his friend and colleague killed, and to make sense of that, he's sort of put layers and layers of duty on it, because somebody doesn't... It's terrible if somebody dies because of a stupid misunderstanding, and that's the tragedy, is that they kill us by touching us, but they didn't know that. They weren't trying to kill us. And to rationalise that, Carrington has to sort of, layer it in a crusade, as so many lost people do. I mean, I've seen people sort of descend into mad crusades of conspiracy theory and all sorts of things, in order to make sense of a world that they're not understanding or frightened of, and it makes them angry, and it makes them convinced that they're being righteous. But actually, it's covering for the fact that they're sad and lost and frightened. So there we go. But yes, John Abernethy, I haven't told his sons yet. I must email them about this plaque that I've given them. And in fact, the actor that I just took a picture of it, and the actor James Quinn was sitting near it, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just taking this," and he looked at it and he said, "Oh, John Abernethy, I remember him. He was Chingachgook in Last of the Mohicans." And so James acted himself there as a bit of a teleactors geek. James is in Flatline, the Doctor Who story Flatline. So there we are. A Doctor Who actor. He's also the voice of the BBC in my Doctor Who scarf, but by coincidence. But yeah, he was in 53.2 when I was. So yeah. Anyway, good. I'm glad that people still remember John Abernethy, and hopefully now people will see his plaque on the wall and Google him. He got an Emmy nomination for Last of the Mohicans. That's only if we have to, says Regan. You know, he's coldly pragmatic, but he's not a sadist. You know. I love how Pertwee is sort of so unflappable and doesn't give anything away. And there's still film and action sequences in this final episode. Sometimes final episodes draw to a close a little bit. And I think some of the guards that are about to get totaled are people that are important. No, I'm sure some come in a minute. Anyway, I love this creepy, spooky music, and they do really good work. These astronaut actors. It's such a simple design. Oh, and you're supposed to be able to see the spectacles behind sometimes, aren't you? I haven't spotted any, but I think Steve Peters wears spectacles, and if you look closely, you can occasionally see them. I'm sure. I know Michael Ferguson said that he would notice them, but I don't think I ever have quite, because obviously there's a bit of frosting on there to disguise the fact, so they don't have to do the makeup, you know, every time. Certainly not on location. But this is a nice idea. You know, it's using television to start a panic. I mean, there's a rich history of that in science fiction, not least Quatermass, where often the alien manifestation is captured on TV cameras in Quatermass Experiment. I always think that man sort of turns around and does a little bit of sort of boggle-eyed, being knocked out acting that's slightly comical. I wish he'd just fallen over rather than try and get his face on the camera. Ah, yes, this is who the notables are. They're the police who come to intercept Regan, because I think one of them is Mark Boyle, who is Kronos, who's a very good stunt driver, Mark Boyle, and the other, I think, is Les Conrad, that's Les Conrad, who sadly died within the last 12 months or so. He's one of Stotts' gunrunners in Caves of Androzani, but more importantly, he has a connection with the very next story, which is that's Mark Boyle, which is that his children are the twins. The Conrad twins are the sons of Les Conrad, who's there just waking up. He hasn't been killed, which means that maybe Max Faulkner didn't. Wonder why he didn't get killed. Are they low on radiation? They killed Jim, didn't they? Jim Daniels, fellow astronaut. Television revealing the aliens and causing panic, that happens by accident in the Quatermass Experiment. You know, they're filming Westminster Abbey and the monster manifests and the cameras capture it, and you know that causes panic to the nation. And ditto in Quatermass and the pit, they're revealing what's happening in the pit, and all hell breaks loose, and people watch it on the pub in television. So, and of course that traces back to the War of the Worlds, the radio War of the Worlds, which didn't quite have the effect that history says it did, although there was it a Colombian or a Mexican version that did cause panic and did cause the radio station to be burnt down, but that wasn't the American one, which did, I think, it did have an impact, but the idea that people went crazy and people killed people and all of that is not quite true. Anyway, there are better people than I who've documented this. But yeah, I too, I'm loving the love for Liz that has come through the correspondence that I've had. I love it when John Pertwee builds a gadget, and he makes this stuff look so easy as well. He, because he's such a good master of vehicles and stuff, I always think he and that's very, very funny. He sort of says to the guy, "Yeah, look, I'm doing this. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, check that out." It's very funny that. And he's sending a signal to John Levine, Sergeant Benton, and Geoffrey Beavers, the husband of Caroline John. There he is, future Melker. Lovely man. He's got a wonderful voice, Geoffrey. He's a charming fellow. And yes, appearing in Doctor Who with his wife. And here's Michael Wisher back again, having been in the early instalment. It's interesting. See, it's odd seeing him in a beard. I never quite imagined Michael Wisher with a beard. He's very tall, isn't he, Ronald Allen? He's a vision in beige. And I quite like the fact that he's quite a sort of he's quite a pragmatic a television presenter going, well, I'm just going to do this stuff. And actually, hang on, he's back in 2 stories' time in Terror of the Autons, and when he does Genesis of the Daleks, he's back the following story, Revenge of the Cybermen. All that was made first, wasn't it? So whenever he's in Doctor Who, he's obviously, it pays to be in the mind, I think, of potential employers, because it's always the case with this job. In fact, as I record this, I'm in a play this week, and typically I've got a really important comedy gig that I'm going to have to go to and from between parts of the performance, and then 2 days later I've got a television job at the other end of the country. The following week, when I'm not doing a play, I'm cruelly full of spare time. That was the quote in the John Pertwee Doctor Who special, Doctor Who magazine, which I think Gary Russell wrote an appraisal of every story, and I found it quite exciting because each story was prefaced with a quote. The one from Channing, been colonizing other planets for 1,000 million years. No one can destroy us, not even you. And for this one, it said, we are ambassadors and come in peace. Why do you make us kill? Which is a beautiful refrain from a monster, from an antagonist. And here they're being threatening. But of course, for perfectly reasonable reasons, their ambassadors have not been returned. But nobody on Earth really knows about this. So it's a clever story about manipulation, really. One man's paranoia leading him to, manipulate the facts in order to create a panic to justify his terrible actions. And again, that is quite sort of complex stuff for Doctor Who. Speed up the broadcast, of course. Naughty Wakefield. He's not as tall as I always imagined him, John Abernethy. It is quite a cast of tall men, isn't it? Courtney's tall and Ronald Allen's tall, but I love the way that Abernethy kind of portrays this single-minded, focused paranoia that causes him to eventually have everyone. He essentially has everyone put under arrest, which is good because we need that as well for Doctor Who at this stage. Is that if UNIT aren't answerable to anyone, or UNIT can't be blocked by anyone, the Doctor's team are too invincible, really. And I like the fact that Ralph Cornish, who the story could have run out of use for, is now being, he's our last hope, really, which I think is rather fun. Out of phase film, which is a shame, but this is beautiful because it's slightly darkly lit. Nick Courtney gets to do a bit of action. Firing on a senior officer. It's lethal force, isn't it? But anyway, it's good piece of action. Nice that the Brigadier gets to, as somebody said in what I read earlier, each of the 3 regulars gets plenty of good stuff to do, and the Brigadier is very, very capable and certainly an integral part of the team. Nice to see John Levine. It reminds me, I was busy. I do have a message from John Levine on my phone as I speak. I think it may be his reaction to Space Babies and The Devil's Chord, which, as I record this, have just been broadcast on BBC television last night. Although I'd watched them, on their midnight release. But anyway, let's not date ourselves. We are now even further back in time of that. I'm being an ambassador for classic Doctor Who, not the new stuff, although I loved it. It's the UNIT theme that gets redone for The Mind of Evil, but I do like this UNIT theme. Is it available on disc anywhere? I think it should be. Will somebody make it? Go on, I love it. Oh, he's that's Terry Walsh there with his gun over. I think the stuntmen always know how to sort of position themselves interestingly on Bessie and on Jeeps and stuff, just to make the visual picture slightly better. So well done, Terry Walsh there, I think. And then there's Derek Ware looking cool, with his leg up and on the side in the passenger seat. So this is a great location as well, with a nice sort of edge to tumble off. And here are I can identify both of these men. There's Mike Horsburgh and Charles Piquet. That's Mike Horsburgh, the taller one, and that's Charles Piquet. And they're both dead now, sadly. Mike Horsburgh only died a couple of years ago, but he was a stuntman and did lots of other. He appears in a few Doctor Who, but he is. There's Mike Horsburgh. But yeah, they're both gone now. But they get to have a bit of a scrap here. I mean, I have to say, not great work from the unit soldiers, sort of approaching them with their guns aloft. And Mike Horsburgh there having to do his best not to notice the Brigadier. He's very much blinkers forward, but so he doesn't notice the man coming up to his side. And Nicholas Courtney is not very good at punching. He punches with a very straight arm, which I'm not sure is the way to do it, is it? But he's not great at the fisticuffs, old Nick Courtney. But nice tumble. It's more interesting than if they just, they could have just gone into the building, but instead we have a bit of a scrap. And do you know what? I look how cool he looks in his suit with his pocket square and his tie. He's a gentleman thief. Ha ha ha! I love Regan, and the fact that he offers the Doctor an equal share. And I love this bit where there's just a very, very, undemonstrative piece of stunt work. Comes bang straight down the stairs. I think that's incredible. Just again, let's make this entrance a little bit more exciting. But you don't see that coming. You think this, and even when he staggers backwards, you think, well, yeah, but he can't fall down those stairs. You at least need to look backwards. It's an absolutely terrific stunt, just kind of bunged in there, and then Regan gets the gun shot out of his hand. He says, "Make yourself at home," and then he has the idea for how to get into space control. He's the one that suggests using the ambassadors. And if that weren't good enough, he then says, "And you won't forget I thought of it." That is much better than him being killed. I love the fact that Regan's last scene has him dressed in a really cool way, offering the Doctor a job, getting his gun out, having it shot out of his hand, making a sarky comment, making a suggestion, and then going, "Yeah, and it was my idea." Now, there's photos of this. I remember these photos being in Doctor Who magazine of this bit, because, of course, this is, we're on episode 7 studio-wise, but film-wise, this is all done, right at the beginning of production. Derek and the Machine, there's photos of that as well. Derek Ware, look at that. Again, beautiful. The camera is capturing the lens flare from the sun. Monsters are slightly silhouetted monsters, but you know what I mean. Men in suits, men in spacesuits, and they look absolutely fabulous. And invulnerable to bullets, excellent, but they're not threatening. So it's a sort of twist on everything, sort of Doctor Who-y. But still giving us what we need, which is a gun-toting, action-packed finale with scary monsters, even though they're not really monsters. It's all working very nicely. Although this last episode, I think all of the last episodes of the 7-parters, I think, can feel a bit like damp squibs. I have to say, this isn't at the moment. But I think I've always felt that, the Silurians... it's quite a small cast by the end of it, and it's pretty much so most of the cast have dead at it, and I think most of it's in the studio, isn't it? Inferno, it really hits its climax at the end of episode 6, and episode 7 doesn't unwind with anything like, I think, the action-packed atmosphere of the previous couple of episodes, because of course they can actually destroy the world that they're in, and the Doctor spends a lot of it asleep. And this one, well, for one, it decides not to kill the villains, but it's had the advance on space control. It's had Regan doing that robbery. So it's had sort of death and destruction and action. It's had the Brigadier arrested. It's had Ralph Cornish arrested, and war threatened. So it's feeling pretty good. But I remember watching this and my brother coming in and watching the end of it and going, "Oh, that was a bit of a damp squib ending, wasn't it?" Because I suppose we probably had the climax now. Although, again, Joanna. Oh, there's Joanna Ross. In situ, that's where she is. She's in a wide shot, and one of these supernumerary there at the bottom, the blonde one of the two cowering women in the corner, is the sister of Margot Hayhoe, who is who's a production manager and assistant floor manager who helped me with Who's Round and whose name is on the credits of loads of Doctor Who's and not on the credits of loads of Doctor Who's that she did as well. But Margot's sister, who's sadly no longer with us, but she's a supernumerary, and she was in a few stories. And he gets to hand his gun over, and he's confused. He doesn't know. And I love the fact he gets to put his hat, he hands his gun over, he puts his hat on, and he takes his time about it, which I love, gets his cane, he salutes, and the sergeant will look after you. My brother may have found this a damp squib. I find it really important, and it's our humanity. We understand. And he needs the Doctor to understand, and the Doctor says he understands, and that makes me go a little squiffy. I love that the Doctor lets him keep his dignity, even though he's been storming about and yelling at people and arresting people and being blinkered and foolish. And I love the fact that he calls the alien a gentleman. God bless you, John Pertwee, Doctor Who. That is, are you a Silurian? I'll shake your hand. This alien's a gentleman. I love that he's idiomatically in terms of etiquette like a sort of English gent, and because that helps with the juxtaposition of the bizarre with the recognisable and ordinary. And some people might shrink away from it and find it a bit too old-fashioned, but I like the old-fashioned. I think there's a streak of old-fashionedness that does Doctor Who no harm whatsoever, and I would rather embrace it than start questioning its origins and what discomfort we as 21st century people might have with the origins of a sort of British sense of fair play and duty and all of that, which we know comes with complicated backstory. But no, I will have it all, thank you very much. And I also quite like the fact the Doctor goes, "Story's over now, I'm just going to leave Liz here, sort you out, I'm going to bugger off. I'm done here." And it even gets to end on a joke. "I can't shake your hands." It's charming. And then we've even got a moment for a wide shot as far back in the studio as we could go, with a ceiling, or a bit of an interior set with a top on it, just to show that this story, even to the last shot, doesn't do anything by halves, doesn't take the easy option, tries to make it visually interesting and different. And because of the order of appearance, we get a top billing at last for John Abineri, and second for Dysart, and then third for Alan. And I can't argue with that order for the final episode. How lovely. And so there we have it. That is the Ambassadors of Death. Oh, God, I love it so. I really do. Oh, dear Peter Day, Christine Rawlins. Yeah, these people I've been fortunate enough to meet as well. I'm such a lucky boy. Brian Hodgson, one of the softly spoken geniuses of Doctor Who. Terence Dix also met. I never had the pleasure with David Myerscough-Jones. I believe he died in France, but also did the Web of Fear, of course. Barry Letts, Michael Ferguson. I've met a lot of people from that story. And I'm really thrilled that I have, because I love it. It makes me happy. I didn't find that episode a damp squib like my brother did, so you're wrong, Paddy. But of course, I'm minded to be excited. Ha ha ha. But I adored that. I think that was absolutely fantastic. And I have to choose my favourite thing about episode 7 and my favourite thing overall. And I already know I'm going to have to lose some things, and I have to sort of get away from the fact that, this isn't an historical document, and if I don't acknowledge a brilliant thing officially, somehow it's it's like somebody getting overlooked in the BAFTA in memoriams or whatever. It's this is not official or important, and I've mentioned everything I like, even if I haven't necessarily put nobody's making a list of what my choices are or anything like that. So I've got to get over that and just go with two things that I can, choose to, one, to be indicative of why and how I love this story. So, but also to see if I can do well with Mark Wright, with whom I've been tussling for victory. I tend to end, even if the 7-parters don't, I tend to always end on a damp squib, even if I've got close with the points. I tend to then screw it up right at the end. It's in my nature to fall at the last hurdle. But Ambassadors of Death, episode 7. I think I'm going to choose, for my favourite thing for episode 7 is going to be, because this brings in so much else, the fates of the villains. Because I would ordinarily want my villain to die, because it's only fiction, and there's something about a death scene, because we don't see death scenes in real life, and good. There's a sort of cathartic thing to watching, I think, violence and action and death in a containable way. And death scenes are a sort of release. And I do sometimes squirm from American films where, the baddie has to always get sort of slightly appalled by Con Air, which I think is a great film where, they go, well, it's not enough to kill John Malkovich just in a simple way. He has to sort of die 3 times, because the sort of glorification of that death is part of the excitement of the payoff of the film. And I'm slightly... I do slightly feel slightly repelled by that, even whilst going, but I do find, the bits where they dispatch the villains in films quite exciting and fun. But it's a fine line to tread, and I think the revelling in the death of the villain and the yippee-ki-yay and all of that, I find a little... That's not my way. I think death is and maybe it's hypocritical of me is that I like it happening, but I also don't like it being, revelled in. To me, it has to be an unfortunate element of victory, one that one regrets rather than that one revels in or dispatches with glee. And some could say that that's me, therefore, not owning the necessity to dispatch your nemesis with lethal force, and maybe that's me being namby-pamby and morally dishonest. It's complicated stuff, isn't it? Nonetheless, and especially as I do, I started this by saying, there is something quite exciting about, and sometimes and even sad, moving, whatever, but it stirs an emotional response. And sometimes of a, yeah, get him, or sometimes of a, oh dear, but it had to be done, and actually sometimes the Doctor, doing that payoff of going, well, that I had to do that, but I'm not wild about it, makes for a complex feeling, and it's all stuff that plays with your emotions, which is what a good viewing experience does. However, so I acknowledge that this feels slightly wrong in a way, slightly off for a Doctor Who to have neither. You'd think even sometimes when the main villain survives, they'll off his sadistic sidekick. In fact, that's sometimes what sadistic sidekicks are for, is for you to have somebody that can be killed without you feeling particularly guilty about it. And so that then you don't feel like you've been shortchanged by the fact that the villain is just put in prison or whatever. And sometimes the villain Battlefield strikes me as, feels like a slightly bum note that Morgaine and Mordred are just sort of thrown in jail on all sorts of different levels, not least the practical one. However, Regan is too cool to kill, and I know Rob Shearman and others, think that he should have come back in The Mind of Evil, and it would have been lovely to see William Dysart again, fulfilling the Mailer role, but I'd have missed William Marlowe, who I think is absolutely magnificent, and who I'm sure will be one of my choices when I get to do The Mind of Evil, but that's not on the list just now. In fact, the person who's doing it hasn't recorded their thing yet, but I know he'll probably be listening. In fact, has been mentioned already in this podcast, but I'll leave that hanging. But yeah, if Regan had been Harry Mailer, he'd have been killed at the end of episode 5 of The Mind of Evil. So that to me would have been rather sad. But they are similar villains, although I think Mailer is crueler and harder. Well, tougher. No, because Regan is tough and hard. He's not quite as elegant, as dishy, and I don't mean physically. I mean he doesn't have quite the elan Mailer that Regan has. He's cut from a slightly grittier cloth, I think. But I love the fact that Regan. I talked about that final scene and how every bit of it for him is just absolutely perfect, and the fact that he doesn't die, but also it's him that comes up with the method that they will use to get into space control in order to kind of, if not save his own skin, because they weren't going to kill him, but to kind of go, well, look, I should get a few years knocked off my sentence there. He's a survivor, even when he's defeated. But he doesn't do it in a sort of creepy, he doesn't start suddenly sucking up to the good guys in order to, he's just like, well, I'm being an opportunist here, and quite bluntly so, because I've suddenly got to think on my feet, and I'm not going to get out of this, but I might as well make it easier for myself. It's beautifully, beautifully done, and I can't think of anything quite like it in Doctor Who. And in the same way that General Carrington, whose desire to do his moral duty, I think, is so brilliantly written and portrayed and conceived. And as I say, I'm always drawn to those people who do the wrong thing for the right reasons, and we see so much of that. And I always try and understand people who have different views from me, and even who do terrible, terrible things. And there is something, as I say, about quite sad something, even if the results of their actions can be deplorable and make us angry with them, furious with them. That doesn't mean everyone's a bastard or a scumbag. Sadly, it would be so much easier, wouldn't it, if everyone was awful and we could just go, yeah, well, I'm good and they're bad. Well, actually, we're all morally compromised, and it's a lesson to us as well to not do bad things for the things that we think are right. And I see people who have similar views to me at the moment, being unkind and being cruel or allowing bad things to be said and done, or them to express themselves badly about people who disagree with them because, well, we are in the right. Well, it's not what you think necessarily that it's right, but how you conduct yourself. And if you do bad things to get what you think is right, well, history is littered with tyrants who did that. So just be careful. You have to not only do what you think is right, you have to do it kindly and well and consistently with your own morality. You can't do bad things to people you think deserve it, because that's what all bad people do. See, this is great. This is a silly, this is a Doctor Who tea time children's program from the 1970s, early 1970s, and it's making me talk and think about things that are pertinent to today. Love Carrington's moral duty, and I love the fact that, again, instead of being killed, instead of the aliens coming in and zapping him, or the Brigadier shooting him, or whatever, him going to press a button and being, them having to shoot him in the back to stop him doing it, or whatever, he actually sort of slightly bewildered. I love that sort of slightly bewildered air Abernethy gives him when it all goes wrong, and he realises that actually lots of good people are now pointing guns at him and are going to take him away. And he sort of has to say, but I was doing the right thing, wasn't I? And the fact that he, in very formal way, puts his hat on and straightens it, makes sure it's just right, because what he's doing is just right. It's great attention to detail. Then puts his cane, salute, and then just checks with the Doctor to get that reassurance that he had to do what was right. I love it. So I love that Regan survives to be opportunistic before his arrest. I love the fact that Carrington survives and gets to have it affirmed to him that he was doing his moral duty. So yes, the fates of the two excellent, top tier, very different, recognizable types, but very different examples of their types get to finish the story the way that they do. I love those two actors. I love those two characters. I love the fact that these two actors and these two characters get to give those two performances and behave in the way that they do in this particular story, which is this slightly odd brew, this one that does things that looks like a lot around it, but just not quite, and doesn't do things quite the same, I think, as any of the stories that it might share some of its DNA with, which what makes it so bloody special, but also so weird and slightly untouchable. And even though I've seen it more than a lot of Pertwee stories, it still oddly is less familiar than some of the more sort of, in inverted commas, normal ones, because the Ambassadors of Death, they do things differently there. And then my thing for the whole thing, I mean, in any other circumstances, I might have chosen the cast, but I've already chosen Regan. Mark has already chosen Cyril Shaps. Ronald Allen definitely deserves a mention. I think it's a really sort of cool under pressure performance. John Abernethy, I think, is absolutely fantastic. I think it's a lovely performance. I think he's a great character, but I've kind of, chosen what he does in my choice for episode 7. But do I choose John Abernethy because of what he represents? To me, he was an actor that I spotted. I've talked about this a lot, I think, in Fury from the Deep, so I don't necessarily need to go over it again. But he comes in and out of my life as a character on screen, and then I was at university with his niece, who became a friend and a bit more than a friend to me, and then his son came to see my show in Westcliff-on-Sea. So yeah, and I'd seen him in Robin of Sherwood, and yeah, he's that actor I liked. I particularly liked spotting and stuff, and I never met him, but I do have a letter from him and a couple of signed pictures. That noise is Bernard scratching. What are you doing, Bernard? What are you doing? They'll think I've got some sort of infestation if you keep scratching like that. You're a good lad. So I don't think I can choose John Abernethy, but I like giving credit where credit is due, and I'm a people person, so I think, so I don't take forever doing this, I'm gonna have to boil it down to 3 people. I think one is Dudley Simpson. I love the score for Ambassadors. I think the first few times I watched it, I probably only really noticed that unit theme, which I think is great. It's, to me, slightly less sort of pomp and circumstance than Don Harper's unit theme in The Invasion, which I think sort of is a bit too jolly hockey sticks and Mars an otherwise gorgeous score. And I also like the fact that, on a personal note, I recognised it when it came back for Mind of Evil and was done, synthed up or organed or whatever, But I love the moody, throbbing, fluting score that accompanies the Ambassadors particularly. But then the drum as well, the dum 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 dum. Yeah, it's an excellent score, and it's actually got moments that are quite jazzy too. I think it's and Simpson's scores became a bit sort of interchangeable later on. He's always good, but I do perhaps like my incidental music to be a bit more distinctive. Whereas of course actually I do sympathise with the school of thought of people who go, no, you shouldn't be distinctive, you shouldn't really notice it. And Simpson's stuff I think is so good at being unobtrusive sometimes, but then it makes me enjoy it less as music, as a score, which is why then when you get things like the Paris the Paris love score of City of Death, it's it's such a breath of fresh air, because you go, oh, this is a piece of music I can actually get an angle on, in a way that the scores for Pyramids and Genesis, which all do their job, are perhaps a bit less distinctive, if you like, which, as I say, could be the point. But I like my music to be distinctive on a personal level, just because I watch these programs over and over again and like having the music in my head as I'm going about my daily business. But that's not necessarily what the music's supposed to do as its actual job. So I'm aware that, I can't be telling music off for doing something it's not supposed to have done in the first place. But I think Simpson's score for Ambassadors is cracking, and I've learnt to appreciate it more over the years. I'd also like to mention Malcolm Hulke. I mean, I'd like to mention David Whittaker, but we know he sort of, he didn't really do much work beyond the early to mid installments, and he didn't do the final script of any of the episodes. And Malcolm Hulke is not credited, but pretty much did the final scripts of certainly episodes 2 to 7. And I actually think they might be Hulk's best scripts, because despite what legend might say, and the fact that Terence Dicks remembered it, being an unsatisfying bit of a hodgepodge of a story, I think what he does with those villains, the human characters, I think particularly, and the way that he, for want of a better word, pads the story out. It's not padded. It's gilded. It's all of that those extra story moments serve a purpose. And I think the tone of it and everything, and especially, I think sometimes we work better under pressure. We work better without a blank canvas, but with certain stipulations. And I think, Hulk was asked to sort of dive in and rescue this thing that had, ingredients X, Y, and Z, and as a result, produce something better than he might have done if he just had, you've got a story to write, and here it is. And I think Hulk tying everything together, and taking what he was given and making something more than satisfactory out of it, means it would be quite lovely to, give him the credit on a story on which he gets no credit whatsoever. But he does a beautiful, beautiful job, as I say. But I think it's going to have to be, and I suspect he's going to be nominated in every single one of his stories that I do, and I've only got one left. But he was a lovely man, and I think one of the great Doctor Who directors. And I think Ambassadors of Success owes a lot of its... Ambassadors of Death owes a lot of its success to him because of it. Just like that little stunt, in that scene, that final Regan scene. So not just that, when it's on location and you're throwing everything at it, but, moments that take up just mere seconds on screen, but that just make it exciting and action-packed and give it attention to detail equally well in studio as in film. Some directors, flourish better in one or the other. But it's not just that he's good at the action-packed stuff. He's good at the atmosphere. He's brilliant at the pacing. He throws everything at certain set-piece scenes, but he also casts well and lets his actors do really good work. And that's Michael Ferguson, the late Michael Ferguson, who I had the great pleasure of meeting, and who I thought was a really nice guy, and was an exceptional Doctor Who director. And actually, bless him, he said during the commentary we did for this, said some very nice things to me. Bless him, Michael. So, yeah, I think I'm going to choose for my overall thing the story's director, Michael Ferguson, who was one of the first directors who I, watching the episodes, I was like, I think this is the direction that makes this good. So it was an early part of my development as a viewer and as an assessor of Doctor Who, and I spotted a few trademarks of his, and not just about where the camera is placed, but also, I think crucially with Ferguson, pace and atmosphere, and pace, keeping it rattling along, or even when not rattling, keeping it moving inexorably towards danger. Oh, beautiful. So let's see if Mark chooses as his thing for episode 7, the fates and certain characteristics of the villains and those two actors, and or the director, Michael Ferguson. Let's see if I can grab victory from the jaws of defeat but I'm more likely to end on a damp squib where I shall have to put on my hat, in as dignified a way as I possibly can, and and make my exit broken but intact.
Episode 7, and it's the attack of the budget monster. It's the budget of death. I love the incongruity of Unit piling into Bessie to go and rescue the Doctor and Liz. It's a brilliantly quirky Doctor Who moment, but it's also a very clever way of making your budget stretch further. The whole idea that all of Unit have been locked up, they don't have access to their vehicles, so the Brigadier takes whatever men he can get his hands on, which isn't many, and they all pile into Unit to go and rescue the Doctor. I love it. It's a very Doctor Who moment, but it's also a moment of necessity in terms of your budget. You don't have money for a lot of extras to go running around. So the budget's probably been used earlier in the story on those fantastic attack sequences, the helicopter sequence, all that. So here you've got your yellow Edwardian roadster with Unit all piled in there. I love the incongruity of it, and then I love when you extrapolate it to the behind the scenes reasons for that. It's just a way of making your budget stretch a bit further in a very funny Doctor Who way.
Oh, I wouldn't have chosen that for a minute, and yet it's an absolutely perfect choice because, yes, I mean, I talk a lot, I think, about this, of one of the great things about Doctor Who being its dissonance, its juxtapositions, its contrasting of old with new, of rackety with sophisticated, of, of charm and violence, of love and monsters. But yes, but also the fact that speaks to the production as well, which fascinates a number of us. The behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, not only is it a charming visual that sort of sums up the show, lots of hard military types in a canary yellow Edwardian roadster. The fact that that handful of extras is actually the stuntmen at the disposal of the team. So the fact that as fans we can go, oh, that's Terry Walsh and that's Derek Ware. But the fact that those guys as well, I did comment on this in the commentary, the fact that they know how to hold themselves in a way that looks sort of authentically sort of rugged and visually interesting because they know what they're doing because they're proper pros. So the fact that they're the stunt guys adds an extra dimension to it as well. But yeah, the fact that speaks to what's going on behind the scenes, the circumstances under which Doctor Who is made, the fact that we fans know that and we know why that is how it is. But actually the fact that is used to then serve the story and serve the tone of the show, even though it is bred out of actual necessity and the realities of making budget children's television adventure stuff, and it all works in the favour of Doctor Who, such as the magic of Doctor Who. So that's a brilliant choice on all those different levels. But I would never have chosen it, so I'm not ruining that. In fact, I'm quite pleased about that because Mark has chosen something that I go, oh, he didn't choose the same thing as me, I don't get the point, but that makes me go, yes, I'm glad that occurred to him so that we could revel in that and enjoy that, and I would get a chance to talk about it, having been prompted by his observation. That's what it's all about. Okay, so I don't think I'm going to win, but let's see what his final thing is.
So I have a bonus choice to make for the Ambassadors of Death, and I think this is going to be an overall observation about the Ambassadors of Death and something I alluded to in my introduction. It's the otherness of the story, how it doesn't fit. It's so very Doctor Who, but so not Doctor Who, and that's what has always made this story for me. It's almost like the kind of it's the peak of where Doctor Who kind of goes to. It reaches this point where it has to recalibrate and come back to center by the time you get to the beginning of Terror of the Autons. It's a soft reboot, but this is taking it to the extreme and steering into all those different styles. It's a tortoise story. It's because of its tone, because of steering into that espionage, that Bond world, that the world. It's more Ipcris file. It always reminds me in a lot of ways of the Ipcris file tribute. But this is the story that I will come back to so many times for the very reason it defies category. That's a very broad point. I do appreciate, but it's the absolute otherness of the story in Doctor Who terms, that it doesn't subscribe to any one category. And that is what I think makes it wonderful. Come out with brilliant performances from the regulars, brilliant guest stars. Yeah, just like I said, a mad fizzy cocktail. So yes, the otherness of the Ambassadors of Death is my bonus point that I would like to draw attention to.
Yeah, I think that's a point beautifully made. And very interestingly, Mark's video, in between episodes, he sort of faded out and faded back up again, which caused a slight crossover, I think, between episodes 1 and 2, which was quite tricky to edit. And then within that, he started to talk about the Crest file, and then it sort of faded out and faded back up again. So if you hear a slight glitch in the sound, it's because instead of it wasn't an edit, it wasn't even an awkward cut, it was a weird fade in, fade out. Now, I could have got my head around an awkward cut, but I don't quite know what happened there. But it's obviously been, it's been done. It wasn't a mistake, or it was maybe a compromise or whatever, but it means I can't quite get an angle on what happened there, and it's given you a slightly idiosyncratic or aural experience during his summation there, because of the slightly odd, intangible way it sort of faded out for a second and then faded back up halfway through a sentence. So even that is a bit like the Ambassadors of Death itself, which has its sort of vaguely discernible monsters and its slightly weird cutting and jumping and jump cuts on moving cameras and the slightly indiscernible aliens and the fact that you don't see certain things quite in the way that you might elsewhere, and the fact that it has that sort of moody, slightly ambiguous sort of music, and that speaks to what Mark was saying about this story, that it doesn't quite fit. It is a sort of dissonant chord in the symphony of 70s Doctor Who that somehow sort of fits, and yet but just sort of comes out of nowhere, and then everything gets back in tune again. It's a funny old thing. It's a funny old thing, the Ambassadors of Death, and yet I'm proud to champion it. I love the way that I discovered it when I thought I sort of knew all there was to know about Doctor Who, and I thought I'd got an angle on all the Doctor Who stories. It was, and I was probably getting a bit jaded about watching old Doctor Who because I'd seen most of it and I had all the received wisdom. And as I say, it was no longer exciting like it had been when I first started collecting stories on video, when every first night was amazing. I thought I probably knew it all as well. And the fact that it came out of nowhere and thrilled and surprised me, but then as I watched it more and more, I still, every time I came back to it, was surprised by it, or as Mark's alluded to there, it was something that I haven't quite got an angle on, or wasn't quite right, or hadn't quite fixed and consolidated in my mental image of it, and still never quite does, because I think it is so unusual and so unfamiliar and so other, even though I've seen it billions of times. I love it for that. It's strange and it's odd and it's unsettling, and it's also action-packed and human and brilliant. And it's not surreal. It's got real grounded characters with motivations, and it's well written, and it's got the conspiracy vibe, but it's also got the outer space thing going on. It is the gift that keeps on giving. It's an array of constant surprises. It's an excellent production, a better production than I think we have any right to expect it to be. And crucially, it defies that reputation with which it came when I was a young fan, that it was, slightly apologised for. It was one that people thought was a bit clumsy and didn't quite come together. I mean, it still doesn't quite come together, but not in the way that it was written up. It wasn't that it was contradictory and padded and disjointed. It was that it's difficult to discern, and it's difficult to categorise, and it's a square peg in the round hole of 70s Doctor Who. And yet it fits it like a glove as well, because it looks like it and it sounds like it, and it's got the constituent parts of it, and yet they all assembled in a sort of slightly dreamlike way. It's a hazy. I love everything about it. I think it's such a rewarding experience. It's such a brilliant piece of Doctor Who. And the rewards have been added to by the fact that doing this, and it's always a bit daunting doing a 7-parter, because you go, it's going to be, am I going to find new and interesting things to say? You'll be the judge of that. But people seem to have really enjoyed coming on this journey with me, and so it's nice now to put this together and have it on Patreon, but then, in a few months' time, release it to your guys. Well, I hope the enthusiasm of the patrons and of Mark and of myself has, if you've been an Ambassadors of Death doubter, well, I hope it means that you give it a good reception. And if you're an Ambassadors of Death lover, well, I hope this has confirmed everything you knew about it, and that I have fulfilled my moral duty of celebrating this brilliant slice of Doctor Who that never fails to take me to my happy times and places. Thanks for listening.
Just a quick plug for a couple of recent pieces of work in the last few months. Back at the end of last year, to time with Doctor Who's 60th and also the 25th anniversary of Doctor Who at Big Finish, I had the Art of the Audio Adventures, which is a beautiful high-end coffee table art book that selects 100 of the covers from Big Finish's audio ranges, going back to the very beginning of the range right up to the present day, speaking to the artists who have put these together and seeing the genesis of digital artwork in that 25 years. And I'm very grateful to all the artists and producers and writers and directors who gave me some commentary for that. It's a beautiful piece of work. And then back in February, there was the release of the latest Ninth Doctor Adventures audio box set, Buried Threats, in which my script, The Running Men, features, which, I mean, it doesn't get much better than writing for Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor, along with Doctor Who legends like Simon Rouse and some other brilliant guest stars. So that was a very special thing to do. And in my ongoing Big Finish work, I'm the producer of the first and second Doctor Adventures, of which we have a new second Doctor Adventures box set out in July. The details have not been revealed yet, but that is up and coming, so I'm very excited about that.
That was Mark Wright signing off with a plug for his most recent Doctor Who escapades. I hope you do avail yourselves of them. He helped me, Toby Hadoke, with this edition of Happy Times and Places. I'm grateful to him, and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davies, Hugh Davies, Robert Davies, Shanti Day, Ian Dean, Tim Dickinson, Sean Ditchfield, Drew, Andrew East, Jeff Edwards, Andrew Egan, Patrick Emery, Jonathan Evans, Bill Evenson, Simon Farquhar, Fleet Boy, Mark Findlay-Smith, Philip Fitchett, Neb Fountain, David Gillespie Pratt, Charles Gears, Lisa Gledhill, James Gould, Graham, don't have your surname, Graham, Paul Greaves, Paul J. Guest, Angus Gulliver, Aaron Gullias, William Hames, John Hancock, Susan Harrison, Steve Hatcher, Matthew Harris and Duncan Harvey. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. I hope you'd like your name to appear on the credits of a Happy Times and Places, or even an Indefinable Magic, or a Too Much Information. You can make that happen by becoming a patron over at Patreon, which is patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you can get advance releases, about 6 months ahead you should be with Happy Times and Places, a month or two ahead with Too Much Information, and a month or so with Indefinable Magic. But they're all movable feasts. But the fact is, you get everything earlier on Patreon. You also get exclusives. You get your own podcast, Far Too Much Information. You get interviews with guests who I might have picked up on my travels here, there, and everywhere. You get behind-the-scenes footage and insight and pictures from the various Blu-ray documentaries and commentaries and other things that I do. And you also get pictures of my dog. But there's all sorts of goodies that are exclusives, including monthly AMAs. So that is what you get for as little as £3 a month, and you get everything at that lowest tier. There are higher tiers, and there are little trinkets that lure you up those tiers. But all of the content, all of the visual and audio and podcast-flavoured material is all there at the very, very cheapest of the tiers, which is £3 a month, and you can get 10% off that, and indeed all of the tiers, if you sign up for a year in one go. That's patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. If you can't or don't want to commit to a monthly donation, you can go and do one-offs anytime at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. No bonuses there, apart from the knowledge that you've helped a starving artist produce work of the highest standard, open brackets, that he is capable of, close brackets. But look, I'm just grateful to you for listening, and if you cannot or don't want to, both of those things are fine, contribute financially, you can help by spreading the word. The most direct way of doing that is by giving these 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts and leaving a few lines of review to say what it is you like about them. That really helps in this modern age where visibility on the internet and findability is really, really important. And of course, it would be lovely if more people listen to these. I'm consistently shocked at how well they do, considering I don't really know what I'm doing. But I hope that means there's an appreciative audience out there for them. And if there is, I'd be really grateful to you if you could help me find a bigger one, frankly. So spread the word, and that would cost you nothing but a little bit of your time, but it would be time well spent, and for which I would be very, very grateful. And I'm all over the internet. These podcasts have their own feed on Twitter, X, at Hadoke Podcasts. I'm there, at Toby Hadoke. I'm also on Facebook. I have a page there. And I have an Instagram feed, at toby.hadoke, which not only has pictures of some of the Doctor Who stuff that I do, but also occasionally clips from my weekly comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which is every Tuesday in Manchester. And we have some fantastic acts playing, some of the best acts in the country, for whom I charge as little money as possible. It's a non-profit making endeavour, and again, could always do with more numbers, even though it's doing very well as I record this, and getting consistent and lovely houses. But I'd like you to be part of them. It actually gets Doctor Who people in as well. Joy Wilkinson, who wrote The Witchfinders, was in recently, and the War Doctor, Jonathan Carley, comes quite often. And there's usually a few of, our kind dotted about in the crowd. Just keeping an eye on things, I think, being Doctor Who ombuds people, to make sure that I mention it as often as possible. I don't mention it as often as possible, but there's usually a reference. No, I probably mention it more than I think I do, more than is advisable, but you can't have too much. Well, a long old day, so I'm going to sign off. But yes, my plaque for John Abineri, which is labelled, in memory of the actor in memory of John Abineri, then I think his dates, 1928 to 2000, and then just says Emmy-nominated actor. And that is at 53-2 in Manchester, tucked around the corner at the back in one of the little cubicles that they have there. That's a little sort of curved-roofed enclave. But it's just a little corner. But it was my moral duty to put it there. I've done the moral duty reference way too many times, but I do like it. I wanted to get a T-shirt of... I did ask Clayton Hickman, and he said he'd do it, but then he went quiet, and I don't like asking people twice, and I know he's busy, but I'd asked if he could do a couple of designs on his Redbubble. One was just have all of Bernard Kay's Doctor Who credits in their different fonts, because I've had that as a T-shirt, and one to do the Lord Kitchener, Your Country Needs You, but instead of Kitchener's face, it's a kind of Kitchener's face, but with Abineri's there instead, but still with the sort of pointy thing, and instead of it saying Your Country Needs You, saying It's My Moral Duty, or It's My Moral Duty. I thought that would have been fun, but he never did. So there we go. I've got some designs in my head, but I've no idea how to make them. But if I had a Redbubble store, that's what I'd do. But I'm not capable. But there we are. And I wouldn't have a Redbubble store. It's far too difficult for a Luddite like me, and I'm already making quite enough, thank you very much. But those were just occurred to me that I'd commissioned, because if he'd done them on his site, he'd have got the buyers and stuff. He probably just forgot, but I never like asking for things more than once, which I know you should do, because I quite often forget to reply to emails, and it's not out of malice or refusal or anything like that. I just other things get in the way, and I'm sure that's what happened there. But it's not in my nature to ask twice. So he's got a plaque. He hasn't got a T-shirt. but it did get me to do the moral duty gag once again, didn't it? Which I think it's now my moral duty to never do again.